it going to be due? So it'll be a short assignment. So relatively short assignment. It'll be due roughly, let's see, today, I guess next Thursday or Friday. So you have roughly a week to do it. But again, it's going to be relatively short. And so a week is plenty of time to do it. All right. Command line argument. So we're talking about shell scripting. So we want to write a program that you can run as a command from the command prompt, or even as a graphical program, I suppose that's possible too. So let's do this. Okay, so we were talking about command line arguments. Now, what is a command line argument? Okay, so that example of using CD, right? So when I type in CD and then some directory name, right? That directory name, that's a command line argument, right? When you run a program and the program prompts you for input, right? So you run a program and it says enter a number, you type in a number, right? Enter another number, you type in another number. That is not command line argument, right? That's asking for user input, right? So if you Google, right, what's the difference between a command line argument versus input, you get the Stack Overflow page, right? So command line argument. So when you run a program and you supply inputs to the program, right, where you run the program, that's a command line argument. So that's what I'm talking about right now. So you should try to not get those two things confused. So if, for example, on assignment 2, you're asked to provide a script that has some command line arguments, then you should not write a script that asks the user to enter in whatever arguments are required. Okay, okay, so how do you use command line arguments in a shell script? Well, the shell makes it pretty easy. So there are these things called positional parameters that contain the strings on the command line. So if you type in this script and save it as something like that, just save it with whatever script name you want. Right, change it to execute permissions and run it, you can see how the command line arguments work. So let's see what we got here. All right, so a command line, so $0 right there. That is the string corresponding to the name of the program that you that was run. Right, $1, that's the first command line argument. $2. That's the second command line argument, and so on, and so on, and so forth. Right now, I'm going to show you something here. So when you're looking at the PowerPoint slides, you may want to fire up code. I'm just going to touch. I'm just going to call p.shell, and then I'm going to change. I'm going to give myself execute permission on that, and then I'm going to edit it. Now, again, on Mac, use whatever editor you want. Otherwise, everything else is the same. Okay, so you might be tempted to go into the PowerPoint and copy it like this. It's not going to work. Let me show you what happens when you do this. And it's super annoying, unfortunately. Where is code? Did I lose it? At least I'm pretty sure it's not going to. Sorry, that's the cat. Control S. Now watch this. Well, I bet you it's going to work. It works. That's great. So I lied. Okay. So it could be the case that when you copy and paste code from the PowerPoint, that you get some bizarre errors, right? And so what's happening is the way that Microsoft is formatting the text in a PowerPoint slide, there's actually hidden characters in it. So there's occasionally you're going to get something called a non-printing space. Non-breaking space. Hang on just a second here. Okay. You're going to get something called a non-breaking space. So it prints as a regular space, but it's not actually it's not what the shell considers to be a space. And you'll get all sorts of strange errors when that happens. Right. So if you're copying code from the PowerPoint, beware of that problem. You may have to type it in manually. If I have time, so I'm going to try to grab all of the scripts that are in the slides and post them for you. I don't know if they're on queue right now. A lot of them are. So especially for the later lectures, there are zip archives of the code from a lecture, but the earlier ones I think are not there yet. All right, so let's see what happens when I run this program. Okay, so notice that program prints out $0. That is the first. That's the name of the program. That's the name of the program that was run. Right. So the first positional argument is always the name of the program, starting at 0. If you call the command line argument, if you call the program with a command line argument, so that's one command line argument, right? That shows up in the variable $1. Well, it shows up in the variable. Yeah, it shows up in the positional parameter $1. ABC XYZ. Right. That's going to show up in 2. Notice that the other ones here. Notice that the script doesn't crash. Right. So I've only given it 3 command line arguments, I suppose. Right. Well, let's count them as 2 command line arguments. Right. So I've given it 2 command line arguments plus the name of the program. Right. The script doesn't crash. It actually runs. Right. So even though right. Even though I haven't supplied it with a command line argument number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, 9, this program still runs. Right, so the bash ignores any non-existent variables. X, Y, Z, and let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right, one more, 8. And so, right, so you can get as many command line arguments as you want from the command. You can use the positional parameters to get as many command line arguments as you want. Now, if it's unusual to have this many, it's unusual to have this many for a small program. Now, if you go above 10, if you go above 9, right, you can't use $, then a number. Right? If you go above 9, you have to use $, brace, and then 10. Right? So that's what that's how Bash script gets its command line arguments. There's another way to get them, and I'll show you that in the next lecture. So here's just an example of running the program. Another example, right? So if I supply it with 3 command line arguments, there they are, and so on and so on. Now, often you'll want to know how many command line arguments are there. Right? And usually you don't care about the name of the script that was run, right? You don't care about the command that was used to run the program. So that symbol there, okay, so $hashtag or $pound, that variable there stores the number of command line arguments, not including the name of the script. So not including the name of the script. Does this script print it out? Yeah, it does, right? So when you run that script there, right, that number 10, that's obtained by looking at that variable there, right? So $hashtag. And again, notice that the 10 does not include that, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 10. Right. The name of the program is always stored in $0. Right. So $brace n stores the nth command line argument. Right. So you can use the braces if you want to. N is less than 10, then you can just use $number. Okay, so how do you use a command line argument? So here's a little script that takes in 1 command line argument and simply says hello, and then whatever argument that the caller supplied. Type that in. Right. So once again, when you go to do this, right, you type in your script. Right. I'm going to leave the comment out for now. $1. You're going to save your script. So we'll just call this hello you, I guess. If you try to run the script, it's not going to work. So there's hello you. Right. Notice I don't have execute permission on it. So if I try to run it, it doesn't work. Okay, if it doesn't work, what do? Well, make sure I have execute permission on the file. So use change mod to give myself execute permission. I can run it. So if I do hello you dot, oh, sorry, control. Oh, when you run it, right, it's // right? Run the script because it run the script that's located in the current directory, right? So // hello you dot shell, and then oops, got my name wrong. That's fine, right? And so that's what appears. So the whatever the command line argument was, the first command line argument was, that gets substituted for $1. Now variables. Like most programming, like most imperative programming languages, you have variables available to you in Bash. Now, Bash is like Python, that it will create a variable the first time you try to use it. So this one says the first time you assign a value to it. That's not true. First time you try to use it, Bash will create a variable for you, which can be confusing, especially if you misspell a variable, right? So if you have an existing variable, and then you go to try to use it, but you misspell its name, Bash will create the misspelled variable for you, and it won't indicate that there's an error. Right, so that's the important part. It will not indicate that there's an error of any kind. It'll happily create the variable, give it no value, and just keep on going. When you make a variable, there are some rules. So a variable name in Bash can only contain alphanumeric characters and the underscore. Right, so the letters A through Z, capital and lowercase, and the underscore. The first letter must be a letter or the underscore. No spaces or punctuation are allowed in a variable name. Stylistically, you should normally start with the lowercase letter, unless you're creating a constant, and then you can use all caps. Multi-word names in Bash, you can either use the Java convention, which is camel case, right, lower camel case, or you can use the underscore. So Bash itself doesn't care. It's not clear what most Bash programmers use to me. There doesn't seem to be any consistent set of style rules flying around, right? So it's not like Java, where every Java programmer expects a multi-word name to be in lower camel case. In Bash, people tend to use whatever they're most comfortable with. Right? For consistency, I'm always going to use separate multi-word names with an underscore. Right? So I'm not going to use lower camel case in any of the examples that I show you. So there's an example. That's the same. Oh wait, here's making a variable. So let's modify that program I just showed you. Right. So in this version of hello you, I'm using the positional parameter directly. Right. If you want to, you can store the value of that positional parameter in a variable. Okay, so name equals $1, right? Or if you like $1, like that. And then here, I can use a variable substitution in the name. So this is going to achieve the exact same thing as the previous version of the program. Right? I'm going to spell my name right this time. Right? It does the exact same thing. The only difference being I've now introduced a variable. Okay? So I've got this variable name. Now, you have to be careful in Bash. Okay, so in Bash, spaces are sometimes important, right? One of the times they're important is with the assignment operator. If you put spaces around the assignment operator, Bash does not. Oh, look, I spelled my name wrong again. Bash is not happy with that, right? So if you put spaces around the assignment, right, around the equals operator, right, you get this error. So on line 3, it says name command not found. Now you say, well, what on earth is going on here? Right? All I did was an assignment. Right? So bash uses the space to indicate as a separator. Right? So when bash sees something, space something, right? It thinks the first thing is a command of some kind. Right? So it's looking for the command called name and it can't find it. Right? So when you do an assignment, you are not allowed to have a space between the variable and the equal sign. Right? So if I remove that space and rerun the script, well, now it complains again. Now it says, I don't know what this command is. Right? And so you go back and you look, well, this is really confusing. Right? You say, well, what on earth is going on here? Well, there's still a space here. Right? What happens to $1? Well, that's a parameter substitution, right? So whatever my first command line argument was, that gets substituted in for 1, right? Well, that was my name, right? So bash thinks that this is a command now, right? Which is very confusing, right? The error message is not helpful at all, right? Like when you look at that error message, I go, oh, what's going on? The problem is that space there, right? So you've taken Python and Java, right? In those courses, you were probably given a loose set of style rules, right? I don't think anybody really enforces style rules in those courses. But you're probably shown code where you do assignment like this, right? Well, you can't do that in bash. Right? Bash, when you do an assignment, there can't be any spaces around the equal sign. Okay, here's an example of an old assignment question. So this was, I don't remember if this was assignment 1 or assignment 2 in a very old version of the course. They want you to write a script, right? The script has 2 command line arguments, right? And they tell you, you can always assume that the script will have those 2 arguments, right? So you don't have to do any error checking, which we don't know how to do yet anyway, because we don't know how to write an if statement. Right, so you might, you can imagine you're going to write a script. It must have 2 command line arguments, right? It would be nice if your script verified whether there were 2 command line arguments. Right, for that we need an if statement. That'll show up a little later. Right. It tells you each argument will be a word, so that's a string, right? And then the script will use the touch command to create files named using each possible combination of the 2 supplied words. And a third word, mole, right? You must use each word just once in the file name. Have the script display the message all done when it's finished creating the files. Okay, so they're basically asking you to write a script. It takes in 2 words, and then you're going to use those 2 words to make a bunch of files, right? I have an example here? Yes. So they want you to make this script here. And it's going to use all combinations of these 2 words plus the name, the word mole, to produce some files, right? So they want you to make little gray mole as a file, right? Then they want you to do gray mole little, right? It doesn't matter what order you do this in, right? So that's gray little gray moles here, right? Little mole gray little, mole little gray, right? So it's just a simple combinatorics problem, right? Oops, sorry. Let's make this program right now. What's it called? It's called breed moles. Fascinating. All right. New file. So it's a script, right? So hashtag $bin bash. I'm going to save it now so I can get my syntax highlighting. So as soon as I use the sh extension in code recognizes this as a shell script, and it'll activate its syntax highlighting for a script, for shell scripts. So the program takes in 2 command line arguments, right? So how do I get the 2 command line arguments, and what should I call them? So I need a variable. So it's useful here to have a variable. You don't have to do it that way, but let's do it this way. So I'm going to make a variable A. You can call it first, second, third, whatever you want to call it, right? A, it's going to be $1. Right, so that's my first command line argument. B will be the second command line argument. Right, and now they want me to use the word mole for the third for the third string that forms the file. Right. So C equals mole. Now in Bash, you're allowed to write that. So everything in Bash, right? So I just write that. Bash just thinks that's a string. You don't need the double quotes around it if there's no spaces in the name, right? So if there's no space or return or sorry, new line or tab, you don't have to quote it. So C is just a string mole. And now it wants me to make the 6 combinations of the name and create a file for each, right? So you don't need a loop or anything here. It's it's a small fixed number of arguments. So you can just do this manually, right? So what they want you to do is they want you to use touch and they want you to make the file. So if I called it little gray, I wonder why it produced this output here. Because that's not how I would have guessed it to work. So I'm going to do it this way. So I'm going to do $1. So that's going to be, oh, sorry, not $1, $A. Right, so that's going to be the value of the variable A, right? And that's just a string. Then I want B, right? So that's just the value, that's just the string, whatever string B is referring to. And then I want C. So there's one file. And now you just copy this 6 times, right? And now you just start to reverse the order, right? So that's going to be B then A, right? And now I can do, so that's BAC. Now you can do ACB. And you can do, oh, you know what? Let me do this a little more. Let me do this in a little more principled way. So I'm going to keep the first character the same. Right, now I'm going to switch the first character to B. Sorry, that's code trying to be helpful. And then I'm going to change the first character to C. Right, so now this is A and C, and this is C and A. Right, and this is going to be A and B, and this will be B and A. Right, and then I think it says to print all done. So echo all done. And believe it or not, that was an assignment question from a previous version of the course. Okay, so there's our script, right? I just saw a question pop up. I'll get to you in a second, right? You can see I don't have execute permission, right? So don't forget to change execute permission. U plus X, 3. Okay, I now have execute permission on the script, so I can now run the script. So dot. So let's do little, very little, so that I match the same output. Oh, and it did all done. Oh wait, am I supposed to print it out? No, I'm not supposed to print out the file names. So are the files here? They are indeed here. There's gray little mole, there's gray mole little, there's blah, 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 right? They're all there. Is there a way to do this with an expansion? So I think you're asking, is there a way to do this in one shot? I don't see how you would do it in one shot, in one line. Can you do it? I don't see how you would do it. This is just the most direct and obvious way to do it. I bet you if you asked on on Stack Overflow or something, some Bash genius will come up with a way to do it very quickly. I can't see immediately how to do it though. Okay, now I should point out something else in this example. Okay, so when you do when you use the $sign to access the value of a variable, right? So first of all, you never write $D equals something, right? So don't do that. The $sign is used on the right-hand side or of the assignment operator, right? So it's never used on the left-hand side of the assignment operator. So when you assign a value to a variable, right, or when I go to use the variable A, right, you are in fact allowed to use, right, I don't actually need the braces around it. if I get in this context here, right? So in this context here, I can use the value of the variable a just by writing $a. Right? Save that. Right? So this is going to echo out the first command line argument. Right? So this should print gray. It does. Right? And then all done. Now the question is can you just use it here on its own? Right? Or should you just use it here on its own? Right? So can I write echo $a, $b, $c? So let's see what happens. Okay. Looks like yes, it works in this case, right? But you have to be very careful when you do that. Okay? And I think the next lecture is going to show you why. Okay. So yes, this often works, but there will be cases when it doesn't. Okay, so let's go to the next lecture, which is shell scripting part 2. So I actually did tell you this. So watch out for spaces around the equal sign. Where is it? I just want to quickly jump ahead to see. Okay. So I'm going to show you exactly when you need that, when you need the braces around the variable name. All right. So that's coming up in like 3 slides. So variables have no type in Bash. Bash is, well, I guess more properly, everything's a string in Bash as far as the shell is concerned. Right? Depending on the context, the shell will sometimes treat the string as an integer. Right? So if, for example, you're doing an arithmetic expansion, right, then Bash will treat numbers as integers. Right? Otherwise, Bash thinks everything's a string. Anything that can be expanded into a string can be stored in a variable, which is interesting. So you can do all sorts of strange things with this. Right? And it looks odd if you're coming from Python and or Java, right? So when I write a gets the value 2, right? That assigns the string 2 to a, right? When you write b equals and then double quotes, right? Some string, then b is the string some string, right? Because it has a space in it, you need the double quotes or the single quotes to suppress word breaking. Right? If you don't quote it, Bash sees the space there and it thinks that this is b equals some and then some command, right? Which will probably barf. Okay. Now I just showed you in the previous question, right? The previous assignment question that you can join 2 variables together, right? Or I can take 2 variables, and if I write them side by side, then that's string concatenation, right? You may or may not need the double quotes here. Right? You need the double quotes, right? If you think A or B might have some spaces in them. Right? If you have no reason, if you know for a fact that they don't, right, then you can leave the double quotes off. Right? But if you suspect that they might have there might be a space, then you must double quote the result. So we're going to go back to our assignment and look at that in a second. Remember, $round bracket and then some command in the round bracket performs command expansion, right? So a subshell will run the ls command, right? ls will send its output, so we'll send its result to standard output. Right? This will capture standard output, right, and store the result of standard output in the variable d. File name expansion works as well, right? So if you write e equals file star, right, then Bash will perform file name or path name expansion on the file star and store the results in E. Right. So let's look at those results. So here you can do it directly from the shell. You don't need to try them in a script. Let's just look at the last one, right? So I need to go into some dirt, right? Oh, maybe not. Did I think I might have deleted all my things called file. Okay, let's fix that. Touch file name. 0, oops, to 9. Okay, so I just made a bunch of things called file name, right? File name, something, something, something. Right? So if I write e equals file star, the shell will do expansion on file star. Right? So in other words, it's going to do file name 0 text, file name 1 text, and so on and so on and so forth. Right? If I echo the value of e, oh, that's interesting. Why did that not do what I thought it would do? That should have done. Oh, that should have done. That should have done file name expansion. Okay, well that surprises me. So I fully expected that to give me back all of these. All right, hang on. Make a note to myself to look at this later and then give you an explanation in the next lecture. What's going on? All right, my apologies there. I guess we'll try the previous one then. D equals dollar, round bracket, ls minus d star. Now if we echo d, okay, so that gives me what I expect. Right. So what does that do? Well, that runs the command ls, and it lists. So it's going to run the command ls, listing everything in the directory. If it's a directory name, it's only going to list the directory name. It's not going to list the directory contents. Right. That's in a command expansion. So it stores the result of that command into the variable d. Right. When I print the variable d, right, I get the result of the command. That one's still confusing me. All right. Anyway, let's look at this thing right here. Here I've quoted the entire $A, $B part of the expression. The reason I'm doing that is to prevent any word spacing that's happening if there's a space in the if there's a space in the string stored in A, or if there's a space in the string stored in B. Now, what happens if you don't quote it? So, right, so if I do something like that without the quotes, and I run our script, that now A, B, C. Well, let's do something a little more original. Name with a space, and then X, Y, Z. Right. So in this example, there are two command line arguments. Right. There's a quoted string. That string happens to have spaces in it, and then there's a and then there's a second argument. Right. When we run this command, right? Name with a space, XYZ mole, right? And all done. What are we echoing here? There, that one right there, right? So it looks like when you print it out, it works fine. Now, do we get those files that we expect, right? So remember how this program is supposed to work? It's supposed to make a file that says name with a space XYZ mole, right? So is there a file called name with a space XYZ mole, right? And the answer is no, there is not, right? So what is there, right? So it's a little hard to see, but there's a space mole here, which is interesting, right? There's a space mole XYZ, right? There's an XYZ mole name, right? And there's an XYZ name, right? So that's interesting. So let's see what's going on here. See? So there are my two command line arguments. What are my two command line arguments? Right. So what's A? A is name with a space. Right. That seemed to work. That's XYZ. Right. So that seems like it ought to work, right? What's going on here, right? So why do we not get name with a space, XYZ mole, right? It's not here, right? So what is this touch command doing, right? So that touch command is doing this. It's not quoted, right? So it's doing name with a space, XYZ, right? And then mole. That's what it expands to, right? So there is the file name, right? Name. There's the file with, right? There's the file sorry. There's the file space. There's the file XYZ. Where is the file XYZ? Should be, oh, sorry, XYZ mole. Oops, sorry. XYZ and then that. So there is the XYZ mole. XYZ mole. Oh, for the first one, I'm sorry. XYZ mole, right? Is it there? Where'd XYZ mole go? Touch name with a space. Touch name with a space. Oh, name. I'm sorry. I'm being a dummy. Name with a space. There's no space here. So there is space XYZ mole. Right. So that's what's going on in this example. Right. If your argument is a file name, right, or part of a file name, right, then you almost always have to quote the string that you want to use. When does the expansion occur? During the assignment or once it's called? So there is the expansion happens before the command runs, right? So when you touch this sequence of stuff, the expansion happens, and then touch is called with the result. Okay, so that's what happens. So if you do that, so let me nuke all of these files because it's getting hard to see what's happening now. So I'm going to remove anything containing the word mole. All right. That just removed my script, but I'm just going to save it again. And change its permissions again. I'm going to remove anything with the word space in it, which is fine. I don't really care about them. I'm going to remove with, and I'm going to remove XYZ. Wait. So when I quote the result and run breed moles, right? So now we have name with a space XYZ mole like we expect for the first one. The rest of them are all still wrong, right? So whenever you have a command line argument that's a file name, right? You almost always have to quote the variable that stores the file name. Otherwise, when you use it, you run into problems related to the word breaking, right? Because Bash sees the space in the file name, and it's unquoted. So it treats it as though it were actually two separate arguments or more, depending how many spaces you have. So be a little bit careful about or be very careful, sorry, about quoting when you might be working with file names. All right. Now, there's another strange thing that happens. Because you've taken Python, you may have had to have dealt with this already. The fact that Bash automatically creates variables when they're first used produces some can lead to some very unusual errors, right? So here I'm going to read in. Here I'm going to read. I'm going to write a script that takes in one command line argument, right? And that's going to be a file name. I want to rename that file by appending a 1 onto the end of the file name, right? So if I have a file called XYZ, right? I want to rename that file to xyz1. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, I use the mv command. I think that the file name might have a space in it, so I quote the result, right? That's good. Now, you can do string concatenation, right, in bash just by writing the two strings side by side. So if you write $filename1, right, hoping that $filename, right, gives you back whatever's stored here, right? This doesn't work, right? It doesn't work because $filename1 looks like a variable name to bash. That all looks like a new variable. So bash creates this variable for you on the fly, right? And it's empty. So this is going to try to move your file name onto the empty string, which is an error as far as move is concerned. You try to do that. We don't even need a script to do this. I can just do this from the command line, right? So let's say I want to move that file called with, right? So I'm going to do file name equals with, right? If I echo the file name, right, there it is. Okay. So if I try to do this, right, so if I move whatever's stored in file name, that's going to be with, right, to hopefully whatever's stored in file name followed by a 1, right, the move command barfs, right? It says I cannot move with to the empty string, right? And that's because that's a new variable, right? So if I echo, right, there is in fact something, right, that has that's empty. So bash creates the variable called filename1 on the fly, right? When you want to do this, right, that's why you need the braces, or that's why you should be in the habit braces around your variable names, right? And so that saves you from these errors here, right? If I do that, right, now bash is, right, it knows that this stuff inside, that's the name of the variable, right? And now I can concatenate a 1 to the end of the name. So if I do that, I should now have, this should no longer be here. I should have a file name with 1, and I do, right? So yes, you can access a variable name without the brace. You can access the value of a variable by using $ and then no braces, right? But you have to be very careful not to run into problems like this. The way to avoid not running into problems like this is to always put braces around your variable names. Now that does get a little cumbersome. So a lot of bash programmers will only use the braces when they have to. Right. So there's the correct solution in this case. Do we want to do this? Sure. Let's quickly do this. I'll quickly introduce the if statement, but I'm not going to do all of the examples. So the if statement is a bit strange in bash. So the way the if statement works is as follows, right? So it looks a lot like an if statement in any other programming language, right? It's a little different, right? So it uses the keyword if, if for else if, and else. So that's not too different, right? Keyword then is needed, right? So every time you have a conditional, so an if or an else if, you do need then, right? You can write it as semicolon then, or you can leave the semicolon off and put the then on the next line. It doesn't matter, right? So that is, you can write it like this, or you can write it like, either one is fine, right? I'm just going to leave the slide like this, right? So these are both acceptable. You should try to be consistent, right? So either write it this way or write it this way, right? I don't care which way you use, right? They're both perfectly fine. But the conditional statement here, right, does not look like a conditional statement from any programming language that you've used, right? So this is the weird part you have to wrap your head around. The this condition here is the result of running a command. That's very strange, right? So this is going to be the result of running a command. All right. Like any other if statement, you do not need the else if or the else parts, right? And you can have as many else if parts as you want. Test commands. All right. So what the heck is a test command? Well, this is a command. So you can put in whatever command or sequence of commands that you want, right? So if the command runs without error, right? So if it runs without any error, then Bash considers that result to be true. So if it runs with no error, it's true, right? And so in other words, if ls minus a root user works, then it will echo test command true, right? If it doesn't work, it will echo test command false. It is bizarre, right? So this is very strange, right? This is a command for the condition. If you change the command so that it causes an error, right? The command still tries to run, right? You get the error, and then it goes into the else part of the if statement. So that's kind of interesting. So how does the result of a command get turned into a condition, right? How does it get turned into true or false? So it turns out commands in Bash or any other, or in Unix, I guess, any Unix-like operating system, commands return an integer value back to the system when they terminate. Right? So when you type in a command like print working direct pwd or cd or ls, right? The shell tries to run the command. If the command runs successfully, the value 0 gets returned back to the right? This is called the exit status of a command. Right? An exit status of 0 indicates that the command completed successfully. Right? Non-zero exit value indicates that the command failed to complete successfully. So exit status 0, command completed successfully. Non-zero can be any non-zero value, right? That means that something went wrong. So back here, right? The exit status of that command is 0, then that part runs, right? And this is considered to be true, right? That part runs, and then you exit the if statement, right? So if this command produces an error, its exit status is non-zero. That's considered false, right? So then it goes to whatever commands happen to be here, right? This command runs successfully, and its exit status is 0. Then that runs, and you exit the if statement. And does not run successfully, then the else part runs. Can you get the exit status of a command? The answer is yes. Shell variable $? Stores the exit status of the most recently executed command or pipeline. So let's look at that and then call things a day. Right. So I run ls. ls runs. Everything's good. Right. What if I echo $? Or yeah, $? Right. So it tells you that the answer is 0. In other words, the exit status of ls, right, was 0, which means ls ran successfully. Right? If I ls copy.text, okay, that seems to work. What's the exit status? It's 0. Now, what if there is no file? So soppy, right? There is no file name called soppy. So when ls runs, it's going to complain, right? Can't access soppy.txt. There's no such file or directory. If you ask for the exit status of that command, it turns out it's 2, right? But it could be any non-zero value, right? So an exit status of 1 also means that something has gone wrong, right? Any non-zero value indicates failure of some kind, right? So that's how your if statements work, which is strange, right? Normally you're used to writing a conditional expression, right? And you'll see, I guess. So in the next lecture, I will show you how you write a conditional expression in an if statement, right? But the way this works is the conditional statement gets transformed into a command, and then the exit status of the command is used by the if statement. All right, so that's how things actually work in Bash. It's strange, but that's the way it works. Okay, a little bit over time. Anybody have any questions about the lecture today? All right, I'm not seeing anything. So I'll stop the recording there. And